If it ever happens that you suddenly see this little can sitting on your table, under no circumstances should you even think about trying it. Back in 2012, there was a company called Bumblebee, and no, they didn't make bees or transformers. They produced baked fish, tuna, in cans just like this. The thing is, in that year, when all of this happened, the contents of the canned food carried a certain risk of being altered. And now, if you opened one of those cans, you might end up seeing not just chunks of fish inside. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Our main character's name was Jose Milena. He spent his 62 years in Los Angeles. Aside from admiring the sunsets on Venice Beach, he worked at a factory called Bumblebee Products. As you've already guessed, that was the plant where canned fish was produced. To fully understand what happened, you need to know how things worked there. This was a factory with massive industrial ovens spread throughout the entire building. Large amounts of fish were loaded into these ovens. Then the ovens were turned on. The fish was baked and later sealed into cans. Jose Milena's job was to service these ovens, to carry out inspections and maintenance. And to give you an idea of how enormous these ovens were, you could literally walk inside them standing up, and the depth of one oven was about 36 feet, practically the size of a bus. To check the functionality of the oven, Jose had to climb inside, inspect all the sensors, seals, and so on. That's what he was doing that particular day, or more precisely, that night. Milena decided to take an extra night shift, apparently because it paid better. He hoped to catch a big fish, but in the end, it was more like the fish caught him. That night, he was working alongside a colleague. His colleague's task was simple: load the fish into the oven, and then cook it by switching it on. Since it was night time, they were tired and sluggish. They smoked a cigarette, had some coffee, and then got back to work. Apparently, because of exhaustion, or maybe just sheer negligence, safety protocols were completely ignored at night. Both of them were drained and drowsy, but the work had to continue. Jose inspected almost all of the ovens, with only one left. After that, he could finally be done. But it turned out that in this particular oven, he had to spend a little longer than usual. To immerse you a little more into the atmosphere of the fish factory, you should understand what kind of smell comes out of these ovens. Let's just say, it definitely doesn't smell like lavender. As you can imagine, after finishing their shifts, workers from that section always went to wash off the stench of fish. By that time, Jose Milena had already soaked up that smell and was planning to go take a shower. Meanwhile, his colleague was in another room, waiting for Jose to finish up. Then he walked out into the main section, where all the ovens were, saw no one there, and assumed Jose had already gone to wash up. And this was the moment of no return. The colleague decided it was time to get on with his own part of the job. He started loading fish into the ovens, and then switched each of them on. After that, his work was basically done, and he too went toward the showers, probably expecting to run into Jose there. But when he checked the showers and locker room, Jose wasn't there. The colleague searched in other areas of the plant as well, but there was still no sign of Jose. He figured maybe Jose had just gone home early without saying goodbye. After all, he was tired, and it happens. The colleague tried calling Jose's phone, but there was no answer. Normally, Jose always picked up. At that moment, a terrible thought crept into his mind, a thought he desperately tried to push away. Still, he wasn't completely careless, so he went to the head of security and asked to review the surveillance cameras to see if Jose had even left the building. The guard agreed and showed him the footage. Within moments, cold sweat ran down the colleague's back. 5 minutes later, Jose Milena was officially declared missing throughout the factory. Over the loudspeaker, the head of security asked anyone who had seen him last to report his whereabouts. A search group was formed, and they went outside to look for him, but his car was still in the parking lot. That confirmed one thing for sure: Jose had never left the factory grounds. The only thing left was to figure out exactly where he was. The colleague couldn't deny the thought anymore. Based on all the facts, the picture was coming together in his mind. He realized exactly where they needed to look for Jose. By the time the search team returned to the production hall, the ovens had already heated up to 270 degrees Fahrenheit. They immediately turned them off and began opening them one by one. When they opened the last one, among the piles of tuna, they noticed something that clearly did not belong. I can't show you exactly what they saw, but just imagine this. Your mom's oven at home heats up to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit when she bakes pies. Now picture 270 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the environment Jose had been trapped in for 2 hours. At that temperature, tuna looks a certain way, and you can imagine what they found instead of their co-worker. And just so you know, this isn't even the worst thing that happens to people at work. Even right now, somewhere in the world, someone is probably being injured on the job. But as horrifying as this case is, what makes it worse is that his death wasn't caused by burning. Remember what his colleague's job was. Before turning on the ovens, he had to load 5 tons of fish into them. 5 tons. That's just enough for a man to drown in, like in water. Which means, when the tuna started filling the oven, while Jose was inside, he first drowned in that mixture, and only after that, he was burned. You might ask, what about safety measures? Well, remember that night safety rules were thrown out the window. Normally, the ovens would never switch on if someone was still inside. There are safety features for that exact reason, but his colleague didn't activate them. After this tragedy, the company employee faced up to 3 years in prison, and the company itself was ordered to pay $1.5 million in fines. But no amount of money or prison time can bring back a husband and father to his wife and children. So here's a bit of advice. Before you bake a pie, just make sure there isn't a friend sitting in your... Now, moving on. At a local Vietnamese hospital, an elderly woman came in complaining about problems with her skin. She told the dermatologist that her skin was drying out, sagging, and just wasn't the same as before. At first, the doctors weren't too surprised. After all, that's something that happens with old age. But when they ran her blood tests, they realized that just yesterday, this grandmother had been a 26-year-old woman who looked like this. And the most terrifying part is that all this time, she had been doing it to herself without even realizing it. Back in 2008, when she was still 24 years old and living in Vietnam with her husband, she began noticing strange reactions on her skin. As you know, Vietnamese cuisine contains a lot of fish, and she loved it. But at some point, she noticed that after eating fish, her skin started breaking out in sores. At first, they appeared on her face, but soon, they spread all over her body. She assumed she had developed an allergy to all seafood. But she didn't want to choose between octopus tentacles and clear skin, so she went for a third option. At that time, she had no idea what she was about to put herself through. Since she didn't have money for proper medical care, she turned to local healers. She went to a market, found some sort of apothecary, and bought a questionable homemade cream for allergies. In fact, even the diagnosis of allergy was self-diagnosed, since she had never gone to a real hospital. The cream she bought had never been tested. Nobody knew if it would work, or even what its exact ingredients were. Months went by, and she applied this cream every day. Until one night, it finally started to work. but not the way it was supposed to. She woke up feeling an unbearable itching on her face. She described it as feeling like thousands of mosquito bites at once. She couldn't stop scratching, even though she knew it was only making things worse. Soon, the itching spread across her entire body. Her husband had to rush out and buy another cream, this time for itching. It seemed to help, and she calmed down. But within weeks, her husband noticed she was starting to look different. Her gaze was strange, almost unrecognizable, as if he was looking into the eyes of a completely different person. He thought maybe she was just tired or not sleeping enough. But then came the moment that changed everything. He had to go on a business trip for a few days. His wife stayed behind because of her condition. When he came back with bags of groceries, expecting to see his young wife, he was shocked. Instead of the woman he loved, this is what he saw at the door. In the first seconds, he probably thought he had somehow traveled 50 years into the future. But the truth was more shocking. His wife had aged 50 years in just 2 weeks. Her skin was sagging. Her face was indistinguishable from that of a typical grandmother. And yet, she insisted that her thoughts were exactly the same as before. She still felt like a 26-year-old trapped in the body of an old woman. In complete shock, they finally went to a real hospital and told the doctors everything, including the story of the strange cream they had bought from local healers. The doctors, even though they were stunned, still tried to help her. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could figure out, apart from the obvious fact that in front of them stood an old woman, even though inside was a 26-year-old girl. There are several theories. Some believe it was caused by that strange cream. Others think it could be a completely new, unknown disease. Still, the doctors promised to help. They even said they could restore up to 80% of her skin using proper medical treatments. And here's the moral, of course. We should listen to our grandparents' advice, but sometimes you also need to use your own head. Otherwise, you might end up in a nightmare like this. Because personally, my grandparents often suggested some very questionable methods for treating illnesses. So think twice before smearing random junk on your face. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow.